Okay, we are live. Hopefully, um, you let me know how the sound is. Let me know how the connection is and the live chat. And if you have any questions, please put them there. I will answer them throughout the stream. I last there was some questions on the last one, and I was just I don't know, I was in the zone and I didn't see them, and they were just like, "Is this live?" Because it was just so late. But yeah, let me know how the sound is. Let me check it. Seems to be good. Okay, good. So we are going to discuss a lecture that was given on Curt Jaimungal's YouTube channel. It's another one of the Rethinking the Foundations series, which is very good. I really like those. I think that that's just a good framework for a lot of new scientific progress, I guess, just because it's not about just adding to what we already know. It's about uh, reframing what we currently know, which is about that's a foundational thing. So, um, but it is a little bit late, but if you are joining live, please hit the like button. If you are not joining live, please still hit the like button if you're watching this later. I really appreciate it. We are going to be changing these to Wednesdays, and the call on my Discord that we do weekly, which if you would like to join that, send me a private message on Instagram, either my personal one or Theories of Every or Theory of Everyone, and I will give you the link to those. I have a call every week on there. It's usually on Wednesdays at 7 or I guess I've multiple time zones in my head because I just moved, but it's at like now I guess it's at 8 p.m. Central Time. So that's when it will be. But uh, always, these will start hopefully at 8 p.m. Central as well, but they're going to be on Wednesdays, and then the call will be moved to Thursdays at 8 p.m. Right now, it's supposed to be the opposite, but I am having trouble getting these streams started earlier, so that's why we're changing days, because it's too difficult for me to start them when I would like to start them on Thursdays. But like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm, and we will get started. So, let me take a breath. Karl Friston's work is one, is something that we've talked about before. Karl Friston is a leading neuroscientist. I guess he's the most cited neuroscientist in the world, which is pretty amazing because it seems like a lot of people do not understand what he's saying. And I will admit, it is difficult to understand Karl Friston, especially if you are not very familiar with the language of the field that he's using, and he uses different language depending on what he's trying to convey. Sometimes he'll use terms from biology, sometimes he'll use terms from mathematics, sometimes he'll use terms from physics. And what's important about the free energy principle and his work is that it's about the reason why he's able to use all these different languages and why he does use them is because his framework that he's put forward, which is called the free energy principle, is applicable across fields. And he basically is making the argument that there is a common pattern and common structures that transcend the boundaries of the various fields of study, like biology and mathematics and physics and chemistry. And so this is very aligned with what I am putting forward as well. And there are some aspects of his work that are extremely similar to mine, and we're going to talk about them on this again, which we've talked about before. But I think that it's good to continue to just investigate and learn, especially something so dense as the free energy principle. So this is the stream that we're going to discuss. Right. So I lost it. It is right here. The physics of sentience. Doesn't that just sound extremely relevant to, a theory called Sentient Singularity Theory? But we are going to discuss it. So, first clip. Right here. Just to reiterate kind of what I was stating earlier.
And for a reason. That reason is, I'm going to appeal here to Chris Fields, that there is no bright line between physics and biology, psychology, and one could even argue philosophy. So the foundations of biology should, by definition, therefore be the foundations of physics and everything else. And I'm going to leverage the notion of everything else by just thinking about the nature of things, a foundation of thingness. The story I'm going to tell is a characterization of what it is to be something and the behaviors that that thing must possess. So this is a slightly deflationary foundation account of existence, in the sense it just describes those things that persist in time over a suitable timescale. The other aspect of this foundational account, I refer to it here as a physics of sentience. It's really just a physics of things that self-organize technically to a set of characteristic states or attracting states, an attracting set. The other aspect of this is that there's no new physics here. There's no new biology here, and there's probably no new psychology. It starts basically with the foundations that are shared by all of physics, ranging from quantum physics, quantum mechanics, through to stochastic and statistical mechanics, right through to classical mechanics. We're just going to start right at the beginning and ask the question, what is it to be a thing? And having answered that question. So the story here is what it is to be a thing and what characteristics must this kind of thing be. And I reiterate, the physics interpretation of this is not new, and it's actually almost tautological. The final point I want to make is I did notice that there was beyond Darwin. In many senses, the account that I'm going to briefly rehearse over the next few minutes is very closely allied with Darwinian thinking at two levels. First of all, it shares the same almost tautological aspect, in the sense that we are just describing things that exist, and that existence is defined in terms of things that are there. The other point of contact is that what arises or emerges from this approach is a mechanics that you could say was the very mechanics of Darwinian selection. So I'm not going to go beyond Darwin. I'm going to meet Darwin and effectively tell a very, very similar story, but for using the language of mathematics and physics as opposed to the language of theoretical biology. What I'll do.
Okay, so we've discussed this on here before a little bit, which is that there used to be a much more common and also easily understood language within within science, and so they used to refer to different types of atoms as different species. And the various elements, they would say the hydrogen species, the helium species, the silver species. Then the language was much more evolved around or structured or framed around sentience. That's not really the case anymore. It's interesting because everything about our scientific fields is becoming less and less framed around sentience, or at least it was. It's changing. The tide is changing right now, but the only thing that has become increasingly or has been very linguistically structured in terms of sentience is artificial intelligence. And what's interesting is that I actually think that this is causing a huge amount of confusion. It's causing people who are looking at ChatGPT and Grok and these other language models, and they're assuming sentience essentially, and but they where there isn't any. I believe. And then when they look at, physics uh, and um, atoms and molecules and cells, they're talking about them in terms of a lack of sentience, which I think is also wrong. And um, what's one of the interesting things about my work is that when I was doing this years ago, I was trying to understand. I had the same idea that Karl Friston did, where essentially, which is that the patterns that we observe in beings that we know are in things that we know are beings are also present in the things that in some things that we don't assume are beings. And that would actually indicate that they are beings and not just things. And so one of the things that I applied this to was atoms and and hadrons specifically, which is the protons and neutrons inside of an atom. And I was like, okay, if a proton is a male, then a female would be an electron, right? And then I looked at it and I was like, no, that doesn't fit. Actually, there's a difference in structure. An electron is a point on a wave essentially, and it's not a composite structure. It's an elementary particle, or it's called an elementary particle. But I think a better way of describing it is like a elementary point, maybe. But then you have hadrons, which are protons and neutrons, and both of those are composite structures. They're composed of elementary points, specifically 3 elementary points for a proton and 3 for a neutron, 2 up quarks and 1 down quark for a proton, and 2 down quarks and 1 up quark for a neutron. And what's interesting is that this kind of allows for this binary triadic structure where it's 3 parts, but it's 2 different parts. So it's like there's up quarks and down quarks. That's the binariness of it. But then each one has 3 of each, or 3 quarks that make it up. And what this allows for is it allows for weightedness and also allows for differentiation. And this is kind of the beginning of the structure necessary for choice. That's why I thought that this was probably the beginning of sentience within creation. The beginning of sentience there was probably no beginning of sentience. Sentience probably just existed and exists. And then because of just the constraints of being in a system that is enclosed and also therefore entirely self-referential, and that means, self-aware essentially. And so sentience is probably an inevitability it is probably inevitable that existence, fundamental existence, total existence, ultimate existence is sentient. But within creation, there's a lot of things that we need to discuss that kind of make things different there. But I looked at this and I was like, okay, if proton is a male, then what would be a female? And then I was like, it's not the electron, it's the neutron. And this made so much sense all of a sudden because for one, you see the same type of interactions where we even call it the nuclear family and the nucleus of an atom. Okay, shared language, different scales, different fields, but the same structure essentially. And so I looked at it's interesting because it helped me understand women. I was engaged at the time, and I was trying, really interested in understanding women. I was starting to see, my fiance in a different context because we were getting married, and I'm just fascinated by gender in general, and I realized, okay, no, the males are the active force, but females are not the negative force. They're the reactive force, which is really the neutral force. They are what neutral really is it it appears it appears reactive because what it is it's taking on the charge essentially of what it is around. So it's not chargeless. People think like neutron is neutral and therefore chargeless. It's not. Even the best way to put it is not that it's chargeless, it's that it is charge dependent. So it will either take on this charge that it is around or this charge. It will be led by this or it will be led by that. But it will not just do nothing. It is not chargeless. There's no such thing in the context of the cosmos that is correct. And which is one, of probably, I think, obviously that's why I'm here, Sentient Singularity Theory's general framework, which is that sentience is a fundamental, is fundamental, and there is an initial sentient being that creates additional sentient beings within itself. And this, according to a specific pattern. And this though allowed me to like understand my fiance, who's now my wife, much better, is like, and women in general, which is that they are charge dependent. That has big implications and really, really actually can help you understand women if you're a man. And there's a lot. There's a lot more to that. We'll get into. We're going to do an entire episode on gender, multiple, but in coming soon, actually. But it also helped me understand isotopes and atoms and chemistry better, because I did the opposite. I looked at us humans and our bond structure, with our nucleus structure, the nuclear family, marriages, and I applied it to atoms. I was like trying to see what can I predict about them without knowing it. And so I was like, okay, I look at marriages, what's a pattern? Throughout history, one of them is that there is no society that has ever existed in which marriage can consist of multiple males and one female. Okay? But there are marriages that are marriages usually one man, one woman, but sometimes it's one man and multiple women, but it's never one woman and multiple men. And I was like, okay, I'm going to apply this to atoms. What would I expect to see? Well, I would expect that usually in an atom or an element would consist of an atomic species the nucleus would consist of equal protons and neutrons normally, but sometimes there'd be more neutrons than protons, but there wouldn't be instances in which there are more protons than neutrons. And I think if there is any, there's one, but I don't even think that is the case. I think there's just an isotope of hydrogen that has 2 protons, but not any, which that's fascinating to think about. Like, we'll get into that later, but that is very interesting. You can't really deny that. But there's no atom that has multiple protons, has more protons than neutrons. That's what I'm saying. There's no isotope in which that is the case. I don't think. If there is one, there's one, but I don't think there's one. I have to go check. It's been a couple of years. But I was like shocked, but also not shocked. It really was amazing to see that there is this common pattern that you can predict, use to make predictions. There's this framework that when you get the scales correctly and the structure is correct, and you get things of likeness, like structures, then you can apply this, especially. And by like structures, I mean probably sentient structures. And so the physics of sentience appears to be the physics of sentience on every scale that sentience manifests, which there is a limited scale. It is not an unlimited scale of it's not. This is about, we're talking about the physics or the metaphysics of a structure that is not space-time dependent. It's not within the context of relativity. So we will get to the next point. But here, memes. What's up, memes? What's going on? Not much. Starting late as usual. Guys, at least I'm consistent. I'm very consistent. I'm predictably late, even if I'm late. But I am also I do predictably show up. I will, by the way, there will not be a stream this upcoming Thursday. I am going out of town. But then there will be one the next week. I think we'll release some clips or something like that on next week, though, to make up for it. I find it so hard to imagine the electricity and how they use examples of single charged particles where are these single charged particles. Is this pre-recorded? No, it's not pre-recorded. This is, what's up, Ben? I see you. This is live. So these are always live unless otherwise stated. So they're just live. I don't usually release things that are, I guess I have done premieres before, but like this is live. The weekly stream is live. Almost pretty much always, actually. Always. Any stream like this is live. If it's a produced video and there's cuts and there's, things like that, then it's not. But if it's not that, then it's live always. So you can ask me a question, Ben, and I can answer it or try. So next clip. It's really just a continuation of the first one.
In the next few minutes is divide this discussion into three parts. First part is going to be just a consideration of the statistics of life, with a special focus on Markov blankets and the ensuing Bayesian mechanics. I'm then going to tell the same story, but using the rhetoric and concepts that a neurobiologist or a psychologist, a cognitive scientist might bring to the table, specifically unpacking the mechanics that has been established in the first bit in terms of predictive coding neural networks. And then if we've got time, sort of move to a consideration of different kinds of things, different kinds of particles, different kinds of people, different kinds of institutions, and draw a distinction between certain things that do not have an authentic kind of agency and other things that might have a natural intelligence or agency, and try and articulate that distinction in terms of, in fact, Markov blankets. Okay, so the first bit then. I'm going to start with a question posed by Schrödinger. How can the events in space and time which take place within the spatial boundary of a living organism be accounted for by physics and chemistry? Now, I'm not going to answer that question, but I am going to draw attention to the notion of a boundary. The boundary, I think, is essential in terms of individuating or distinguishing something from everything else, or indeed nothing or no thing. And I'm going to read that boundary as a statistical object, specifically a Markov boundary or Markov blanket. So what's a Markov blanket? Well, imagine we had a little universe where these cyan circles represent states and the arrows or the edges represent a causal influence. So this state influences this state. And if I identified some set of states, say my internal states, then the Markov blanket comprises the parents, the children, and the parents of the children. And the role that this set of states, this blanket, plays is that it separates me statistically from all the other states in the universe. If I wanted to know the dynamics of my internal states, given everything else in the putative universe, then I'd only need to know my blanket states. In other words, it provides a statistical veil or insulation that enshrouds my internal states and separates and individuates my internal states from my external states. Technically, it just means that the dynamics on the inside are conditionally independent of the dynamics on the outside, given the blanket states. I'm going to make a further move here. I'm going to introduce a bipartition of the blanket states into sensory states and active states, where the sensory states influence but are not influenced by the internal states, while the active states influence but are not influenced by the external states. So we've got this interesting but very simple partition of the states of any universe from my perspective in terms of blanket states comprising sensory and active states that together with my internal states could be regarded as the states of a particle. So it could be a small particle, it could be a person, or as you've just intimated, an institution. It doesn't matter. The rules or the causal structure and the Markov blanket should apply in a scale invariant and possibly even scale-free sense. And just to provide you with a couple of examples of different scales, here's my favorite system, the brain.
Okay, so fascinating, because this is probably it's there's I've seen other people come very close to very have a model that's very similar to mine on a fundamental level, and this is one of them. There's maybe one more. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was some philosopher, and I don't remember what like the four-part partition was that he was proposing, but it was similar to mine. This one is very similar too. And this right here, internal, external, sensing, and acting. This is kind of the framework of what he's calling a Markov blanket, which is the way in which it's the structure of in this framework of differentiation, I guess, or individual. It's the individuated structure. It is the individuating structure, maybe is a better way of putting it. And what's fascinating about that is when I first started working on my work, I was not trying to do any of this. I was trying to understand the inevitable political goals of AGI. That's what I was trying to do. Was it going to be benevolent, or was it going to be a tyrant? That's all I wanted to know. And I was like, okay, well, if I want to do that, deduce that, then I have to figure out how does mind work? And I remember thinking about how to view the world. Like, how do you view the world most fundamentally, and how do you navigate it? How do you differentiate information? How do you judge it? And I was looking at myself. I was not doing research on what has already been proposed. I wanted to just do it myself, because I was like, I have a mind. I am a mind. I have a brain. I am a mind. And what better example of a mind to look at than mine? I have an inside view of it. And so I also remember that Eric Weinstein was talking about his theory of everything at the time, and I could just tell like there was some similarities in quantities that he was proposing and things like that. And I was like, and he said, we need to figure out a way to escape relativity. We are trapped within our perspective is trapped within the framework of relativity. And I saw this everywhere. I mean, you can see this in our political discussions, and our racial discussions, and our gender discussions, and our historical discussions, our moral discussions, everywhere. We have everything has turned into a relativistic context, and some things are not meant to be in a relativistic context. But he said, how do we need to figure out how to escape relativity. And I was like, okay, how do we do that though? I was like, how do you perceive that which the world in a way that is allows for differentiation, which is almost like perception itself, but also in a way that you don't have size and speed and strength. And so if you're saying, I am looking at this structure and it's bigger than that structure, or it's smaller than that structure, it's faster than that process, or slower than that process. These are all relativistic contexts. And so you can't say it's a triangle, or it's it's a I mean, you could say it's triangular, I guess, but like it's you can't use any terms that have to do have to do with describing perceptions within space-time. So color and light and brightness and all these things, just can't use it. So it's like, what is this framework? And then I had an epiphany one night, and I don't even remember how exactly what happened, but I think I was just thinking about like, how do I differentiate? How do I know that I'm different from that person? And that's what I was thinking about. And how are my cells related to me? Are they me? Are they not me? And then I had this epiphany for what I call the 4 primary perspectives. And that was the breakthrough for my work. From that moment, it was just like, there was a process that I could follow. There was a direction that I could investigate and pursue. There was a path before me as soon as I had this like epiphany. And it was like amazing that this epiphany for these 4 primary perspectives, because it was like I immediately knew them all. And this is why right now. And these 4 primary perspectives are these. If you're familiar, then you already know. But the 4 primary perspectives. So basically you start with a sentient singularity. By the way, this is my work. This sheet is it's a worksheet. So just know that like there's all kinds of things here that just are there. Some of this is like year old and from streams that I did and working sessions. I know it looks messy, but that's this right here is the 4 primary perspectives. And you start with a sentient singularity, and every sentient singularity perceives 4 primary perspectives simultaneously. Why? Because they are co-defining. And what this allows for is it allows for differentiation and framing, a framework for differentiation that is not dependent on relativistic contexts. Okay? So you can say, I am separate from you, and you are separate from me, and my cells are inside me, and I am, outside of my cells, or you could say that you are inside of a marriage and someone else is outside the marriage. And you can say I'm separate from you and you're separate from me, but I'm one with my wife because in the context of a marriage. So this is the framework. And you can see here that inside means separate and oneness. Outside means separate from oneness. Oneness basically is like inside and outside of separateness. It's like all of them. And then separate is inside or outside of oneness. So all of these are defining of each other. That's why they are simultaneously perceived. You cannot, if I asked you, what your relationship with something is, or someone, you're like, I'm separate from them. What that means is that in order to perceive that, you also have to know that you are one with yourself in order to know that you are separate from them. And you have to know that they are one with themselves in order to know that they're separate from you. And you have to know that they are outside of you in order to know that they are separate from you. And that is because you have to know what and who is inside of you. Your cells are inside of you, but housekeeper or, teacher or whatever is not, hopefully, at least. But so this framework allows for us to perceive relationships that transcend the context of relativity. They are fundamental relationships, essentially. This is a fundamental framework. It is from this framework that all of these 4-dimensional structures that are fundamental to our fields, our various fields, comes about. Everything from north, south, east, and west to right, left, up, and down to gravity, electromagnetism, the strong force and the weak force, to the structures that you can see in the elementary particles. There's also a quadratic pattern to them. This is everywhere. Okay, it's in math, it's in science, it's in math, it's in chemistry, it's in physics, it's in your, it's in navigation on a compass, it's everywhere. And you just have to know where to look. But the reason why is because it's coming from your mind. And it's also because you're inside of a mind. So it's inevitable that this is the case. In fact, this overlap will actually cause an eightfold periodic pattern to emerge, which is two overlapping four-dimensional views. Okay, you have a four-dimensional view, God has a four-dimensional view, you're inside of God, and you can see kind of this eightfold pattern, that periodic pattern that in all kinds of things, octaves and all kinds of stuff. So, but this is the foundation of differentiation. And it's very similar to right here. Internal states, external states, sensing, senses, and actions. So sensing and acting. And they are very, I mean, obviously, like, I don't even need to explain it, but like, just look at it. Internal, external, sensing, and acting. Inside, outside, separate, and oneness. I think this is, I don't know whether, I think this is more fundamental because we're not even talking about action yet. We're just talking about perception with this. We're not even talking about action. And so, but it's very close. It's extremely fundamental still. This is extremely fundamental stuff. It's probably the next step up. I haven't seen anything more fundamental than this other than this. And that's just because this structure is not even action dependent. And it kind of, it precedes even perception of structure that is conceptualized out of being outside perception almost, which is like, I hope that makes some sense. But here we have sensing and acting, and we have internal and external. Here it's like we don't even have to say sensing. It's like this is just perception in the first place. It's just it's just different. It's like I don't know. It's like the context of this. And once things get moving, this is what you get. So very similar, and also very similar kind of application where this framework came about to try and have a way of navigating or orienting within a structure in which differentiation exists, but also is not space-time or dependent or within a relativistic context. Whereas, so it's about the boundary of being. That's what it is. This is about the boundary of being, most fundamentally. But it also, you can use these terms. I mean, I don't know. I would say actually they are just pretty much primarily about the boundary of being. That which is inside of something else is not necessarily part of something else if it is not a being. So if it's not a being inside of a being, that's part, in terms of the fundamental periodicity kind of that arises, this eightfold periodicity of sentience that arises in my work, that like cells inside of, organisms and molecules inside of cells and atoms inside of molecules or hadrons inside of atoms, you could say. So that's the periodicity of sentience, essentially, that my work proposes. But outside that context, this doesn't completely apply, because you could say that, there's water inside of my water bottle here. There's tea inside my tea bottle. Is it one? Are they one with each other? And it's like, not really. You can remove all of the tea from this and still have the bottle, I guess. I don't know. Maybe but then you think about it and it's like, is it still a tea bottle at that point? I don't know. Maybe there's still this framework of the four primary perspectives. I guess it kind of still does apply within the context of definition, which is interesting. But and this is the same kind of, this is a similar application of this Markov blanket, which is the statistical boundary, as he calls it, which is, he's saying parents, child, and parents of child. I'm a bit confused by that. Does he mean grandparents? I don't know, but that would consist of the nuclear family, and that is a differentiated structure. But maybe what he's talking about here is this is like the marriage. This is the children. This is the parents. This is the marriage. I don't know exactly. It's the language he uses here is a bit confusing. But that would, be the boundary of the family, is what he's saying here. It is a singular structure. And even in my work seems to imply that that is one of the structures in the periodicity. Right here, family, assembly of organisms, preceded by organism, assembly of cells, succeeded by caste, assembly of families, essentially. Caste isn't the perfect word, maybe tribe. But both of these terms have pre-existing understandings about them that are not exactly what I'm talking about. But it's kind of like caste/tribe. This is like the next level up. But I don't think there's a word in the English language to specifically state what I am proposing. Maybe nation, but like we have a perspective or an assumption of understanding of the word nation that is different from what I'm trying to describe. So there isn't something really there, because like a country is not what I'm trying to describe. But let's see, the chat is going. So look up light electricity. It's totally fascinating. Oh, Ben Ultimatum, I'm not sure any human truly knows. Wait, what did he say? Hi, the one form of physics I can't wrap my head around is magnetic and electric fields by single charge particles. Does not mean there are magnetic and electromagnetic fields for every part. I don't know every particle in the known universe. I don't know exactly what you're stating, but my head around is magnetic and electric fields by single charge particles. I don't know exactly what you're getting at. But here's what I will say is that within the context of my work, Sentient Singularity Theory, an electron is a point of perception of a wave that we're in the wave, and we're also like looking at the wave, and but because of the constraints of focus of your mind, you're seeing a singular point, because that is the definition of focus. So that's the kind of the constraints. Something is going. I moved to Texas in the last couple months, and people tell me that allergies can be bad here, and I was like, oh, whatever. And I did not have any when I came out here originally, but I am starting to have some allergies. So if my nose is itching, I apologize, but that is what is happening. Something is up. And it's funny because I said to somebody, I was like, oh, I went there, this past summer, and I had no allergies, so I think I'm good. And they were like, no, you don't understand. You have people who are allergic to things in the summer, and then you have other people who are allergic to things in the winter. It's not just allergy season. It's like depends on what your allergies are for. And seems that way. But it's not as bad as other people have described it, but at least not yet. So very interesting though. This Markov blanket structure it appears to be just a projection again and it's a little bit not quite a projection. It's almost like it's like the next step. Whereas some things are like a projection, like gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. The perception of these around us is a projection that is being projected by or viewed through, it's like you're looking at through glasses that have this inside, outside, separate, and oneness, you know, lenses that are partitioned into these inside, outside, separate, and oneness manifold structures. And so like everything you look at will just, you know, fold like that. But including physics. So you look at physics, that's what you're going to see. You look at, you know, navigating on a map, that's what you're going to see. You look at it's interesting, like map navigation is north, south, east, and west, and it's kind of like a third person way of thinking about navigation, because the reference point is both you and the map. It's like you in the map, but then there is there's the kind of first person navigation orientation or navigation structure, which is also fourfold. It's up, down, left, and right, and it's like from a first person view. If you think about a video game, almost, it's like when you're looking at a third person style game or a third person view of a game. You know, I remember like when I used to play video games, like you could change it. You could be like, I want to see the character, or I want to see the world through the character's eyes. You know, you could just change your viewpoint. I mean, I don't play video games that much anymore. I'm nothing against playing video games. I just played them always. For me, they were a group activity, and so I don't have anybody to play with anymore, so I just don't. But nothing against video games. But I'm sure that people who play, like, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And I've lost my train of thought a little bit, but there's this other component of it. Okay, yeah, that's not just that you're looking at the world through these glasses that are dividing the world. The world is also perceiving everyone and itself and everything through this fourfold structure, because it is the foundational framework of sentience. It is. And I guess you could almost say that, like, the difference between mine, this is actually a good way to put it. My four primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness are almost like the right, left, up, and down. Whereas Karl Friston's external, internal sensing and acting Markov blanket structure is like the north, south, east, and west way of looking at the world. It's like the third person way of looking at the world, almost, even though it doesn't. I get that it you know, it's like talking about sensing and it's talking about acting, but it's kind of like it's already you can, there's a part of this structure that is being described as separate in a way from perception itself, which is like acting is different than sensing. Sensing is I guess it's like, you know, it's a form of, it's like a perception, but it's a little bit like contextualized, more contextualized, less or less fundamental than just like, I don't know, like self-awareness. But whereas mine is not, it's like you haven't even gotten out of your body yet. And so there is no external state with mine. There's outside, and there's you viewing something as, but it's even then it's a little bit different. I'm not doing the best job at explaining it, but so as I stated on my video, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, this is not a competition. Most specific fields and discoveries and things like that are different than this in how we kind of need to go about them, because you don't need them as the other theories as much to contextualize each other. Whereas the more fundamental you go, for the theories that are not completely they're not as fundamental as they could be. Those theories need the theories around them to be helping to contextualize them more. And so that I think that this is a good thing that it's, I used to, when I saw things like this, when I first started my work, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody else, they're going to beat me, like he's been at this for decades longer than I have. Like he's going to beat me if he hasn't already. I mean, like, but many people would argue he has beat you already. Like this is published and yours is not, whatever that means, it's like mine's online, but, is this publishing right now? I don't know. But, the point, I get it, but like the point is that it's not that, first of all, there's multiple problems with that perspective, and I had to check myself, and still have to sometimes, like, but it's not nearly as common as, if you, like, it's not about, one of us winning. It's about the truth winning, essentially. You want the truth to win, and you should want the truth to win. If you don't, then and all of us have, like, moments of lapse and issues, but you should want the truth to win, not your thing, if it's at the sacrifice of the truth. And so, for one, so it's not about winning. It's about, like, what is more accurate, or what is more fundamental, or not. And they're not the same thing. You can have two things that are that are very true, that are true. One of them is more fundamental than the other, but they're both true. And then the other thing that I realized is that it's good, because all of a sudden everybody had a theory of everything, and I was like, and I didn't try to have a theory of everything in the first place, and that's what I had to keep reminding myself of too, is like, the goal is not to push out just a theory of everything. Like, I had an experiment idea that I want eventually done. We'll talk about it this year, and I had I wanted to understand what is the inevitable, like, relationship between humanity and AGI, and I got the answers to that one, I think, but we'll see, but I also got so many more answers, and it just transcended just those individual goals. But still, like, it's not, my goal has never been, like, to put forward a theory that is the theory that scientists, like, everybody accepts as the theory or something. And it had no name for years. It was just like, here's my work. That's all I call it. It's like my work. I didn't say my theory. I said my work. And I was like, it's cool to see all these other people, like, working on their stuff, and I want to contribute. And then I realized I had to have a name for it, because none of the current theories had a name that was fundamental, that as fundamental as it could be. And and I thought I think that that's very important. But it might, and I discussed that also in my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video, which is linked below. But it's good that other people are starting to have the same ideas, because if you're the only person who has, like, this idea, and other people just don't anywhere around you, then good luck contextualizing and connecting your idea to the things other people are involved with. And if that's the case, and you can't make those connections, then it's probably, it could be wrong, very wrong, what you're conceiving of, if it's not able to connect to anyone else or anything else that's going on. But it also just means that it's not going to go anywhere. And just because something does go somewhere does not mean that it's correct, but it means that it's relevant, and relevance is part of the most fundamental truth. Is the most universally relevant, or that which is the most fundamental truth is that which is most universally relevant and most specifically relevant. And So it's it's a good thing that people are starting to come up with this similar ideas, because we can talk with each other, which you can't do if nobody else has similar ideas. Memes. I think if you're not chemically combined into one object, you can be separated without using energy to split the molecules residing the tea and water. Then it's not as one. Yep, you're probably right. You're probably right. That's there is not, but is it one from a? What I meant was, it's not fundamentally one. That's for sure. You're definitely right about that. It's not part of the continuous chain, the chain, the nested chain of sentient structures. Like, it's not, but is it definitionally one is the question. Is like, if you remove the tea, is it still a tea bottle? Well, I guess the answer is if it once had tea in it and it doesn't anymore, but you don't plan to put anything else in it, then it's still a tea bottle, because that's how it was defined to you in the first place. Or you could also say, if it's never had tea in it, but you intend to put tea in it, then maybe you could call it a tea bottle, because that's going to be that is still how it's defined to you, is like, that's the goal with it. And it was the goal of it when you first got it, was that it had tea in it. So I guess goals are definitional, they are the way in which we actually define the world and orient and navigate within it. And so it's interesting to think about, is like, there is that, but is it just kind of relativistically, like the way that we think about everything else? Is the tea one with this bottle? No, not at all. But the other question is, are these, but see, you can't even say that, is the tea one with this bottle? The answer is no, but it's like, is the bottle one with this bottle? Outside of a definitional context, is the bottle, are the molecules one with each other because they are part of the same bottle? And I would actually say no, they're not. They are, they're not. They're because you can cut them. Like you said, you can't, you're not, if you cut a bottle, like there's no chemical energy being used, just cutting it in half. And but there's more to this as well. But that's part of it. That's a good observation, actually. Like, it's a really good observation. But I guess it's interesting to hear people's the comments on the things that I say about my work, because it's just looking at it from a different view, an outside view, whereas I was like an inside view. It's like, I built the periodicity of sentience, out by just looking at, examining what comes after this, what comes after this, or what comes before this, what comes before this, what comes before this, outside of the context of a size scale. Because that's where most people go wrong with this with like a fundamental division of things in the world and beings in the world. Is they'll be like, well, a molecule is smaller than a cell, and a cell is bigger than a molecule, and an organism is bigger than a cell, and then a planet is bigger than an organism, and a universe is bigger than or like a galaxy is bigger than a planet. And the problem is that that's no longer a fundamental scale, because you're talking about not just inside, outside, separate, and oneness. You're as the defining context of the relationships. You're also talking about like scale, like it's in terms of I guess dependency. It's like a dependent scale. It's like you cannot have it's just different. It's just a different type of thing. But you're looking at it from the outside, and you're like, this is a property that it seems like is like if the molecules of this bottle are chemically bound to each other, then you would need chemical, like release chemical energy almost, if like in order, if they were to kind of separate, is what I think you're kind of saying. And I haven't thought long enough about exactly how you described it to apply it to other scales, but I think that that's probably accurate. Is like, but look at how we harness energy too. It's like chemical energy is, we burn things and release chemical energy, and you destroy, possibly some type of bonds there. But it's even more so than that, though. Is like, I think that nuclear energy is like a different type of breaking than even chemical energy. Um, it just is. I think you're like, it's because with chemical release of chemical energy, it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's not. I got to think about it. But it's definitely more fundamental breaking. You're breaking the structure that is below, um, that which is the foundation of the next level up, which is chemical bonds. But uh, yeah, I guess it's just interesting. I gotta think about it. I can see it, but I can't explain it yet. Um, okay. Good night. Night. SK. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. By the way, it helps fuel the algorithms. Share this with people who if you think it's valuable. But I used to spend my days playing World of Warcraft. Now I spend my days on Wolfram Alpha. That's funny. And you know what? Both of them are fine. Do what you. No, I'm not gonna say do what you want. With your life, because we have common responsibilities, but also like you are given, everybody's given their kind of niches for a reason. And there's also, it's funny because every time I ask people if they play video games, they're always so defensive of it. They're like, yeah, but I don't play that much, and I don't know, because I think it's because I say I don't play video games, and they think that it means that I'm judging people who play video games, but I'm not judging people who play video games. I just don't play video games anymore because like I said, it was like a group activity for me. And it's not even an Xbox. I don't mean that by Xbox Live. I mean like I'm sitting next to my brother and friends playing video games. My brothers and friends. That's it. But and I just have other things that I like to do more usually. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with video games. There's nothing wrong with video games. You know. But everybody's always so defensive of it. So here, next clip.
How does that read as inference and Bayesian filtering or sentient behavior? Well, that's where the Markov blanket comes in. So if we now go back and just remember that previously we just been talking about any arbitrary and exceedingly large state space, X. Now we're going to partition X into the external, internal, and intervening blanket states. And furthermore, just focus on two of those subsets, namely the internal states of any given system, say me, and my active states. And then by construction, if you remember, the unique thing about the internal states and the external states is that they are not influenced by the external states. However, that Helmholtz decomposition still has to be present, which means that I can write down the dynamics of my internal states, say, or my neuronal dynamics, and my motion of my actuators, my active states, my muscles and autonomic reflexes, as in terms of this Helmholtz decomposition, where the gradients are supplied by exactly the same potential. So the log of the probability of some sensory sector of my Markov blanket given that particular Markov blanket partition. The reading of this, and it is just an interpretation, is in terms of perception and action respectively. And the perception part now yields to an interpretation in terms of sense making and Bayesian inference, which is why I was talking about the emergence of Bayesian mechanics from the master equation or the time-independent Schrodinger equation or the Fokker-Planck equation, if you're given the Markov blanket partition. In other words, if something exists in the sense that it possesses this distinguishing aspect in terms of possessing a Markov blanket, then it must comply with these its internal and active states, sometimes referred to as autonomous states of this particle or person, must conform to this dynamics here. So now the game is, how would one interpret this? How will you describe this to your students or your professors or your children? And there are lots of ways that you can do that. So I've just listed a few here. I'm sure you will have come across all of these. But just to, again, reinforce this point that this is foundational in the sense that it is assumed or described by many theories of self-organization and in particular accounts of behavior, things that actually move. So what is this quantity? Log probability of my sensory states given a Markov blanket. Well, we've just said that these states belong to an attracting set, the pullback attractor. So these are the sensory states that are attractive to me in the sense that they score those kinds of states I expect myself to be in. If I was Darwinian or Darwin, I would say that these are the adaptive states. They are the states that I repeat are characteristic of me as a surviving phenotype. Given I've got this pullback attractor, and it is permitted by the context in which, or the universe in which, this attractor is manifest. So it just scores the attractiveness or the value to me of being in this particular sensory state here, or the value the sensory state space. So all this equation is saying is that both perception action is going to try and maximize value, and that can now be read as reinforcement learning. If I was an engineer, it would be called optimal control theory, and if I was an economist, it would just be expected utility theory, where the reward, the control objective, or the utility just is this log probability of being in a state that is characteristic of the kind of state that I find myself in.
Notice he's describing the same structure in multiple fields. This is what it's called in this field. This is what it's called in this field. This is what it's called in this field. It is this pattern that is persistent and transcendent, and it's not field specific. It is universal and personal, because the universe is a person, and so are you.
The negative of this thing is what I was referring to before, which is the self-information, also known as surprisal or surprise. So this equation says that I'm trying to, or it looks as if I am trying to minimize my surprise or self-information. And from that, we can read off the principle of maximum mutual information, or the Infomats principle, equivalent to the minimal redundancy principle of Horace Barlow, and the free energy principle. So where does free energy principle get into the game? Well, the variational free energy is a proxy for, in fact, it's actually an upper bound on the self-information. So when people talk about the free energy principle as systems trying to minimize their free energy, what they mean is basically systems that conform to this foundational Helmholtz decomposition of their dynamics, where you've just substituted the free energy for the Lagrangian, the potential self-information, or the surprisal.
Just a moment. Sorry, Professor, you keep saying, well, before we explain this to our children, some non-trivial task, to put it lightly, you keep saying given a Markov blanket. Now, what's giving us the Markov blanket? Is it the causal structure of the universe?
Yeah.
Is it our internal versus active states? Or does the Markov blanket give rise to those instead? I understand there's some interplay. I understand that. But what gives us initially the Markov blanket?
Right. Well, I think you're...
I will answer that question, because I mean, first of all, I don't think that he really answers it, but the best you can kind of do is that there is a Markov blanket almost. It's like, it's not even that there is given, but if you really want to know, I think the answer is this. This is what's giving us the Markov blanket that he's describing. It is the four primary perspectives that are co-defining and dependent on each other, that are simultaneously perceived by any sentient being. Any perception is built on this framework. It's like the four fundamental forces of perception, but instead of physics, it's perception. It's the four primary perspectives. This is what's giving us that Markov blanket, but it's also what's giving us the perception of the four fundamental forces and the four chords of a song, you know, that you can use, that make us, it gives us like this completeness, kind of like perception to it. It's like even why is that which is perceived as stable is 4 almost. It's like, how many legs does a table have? Well, it could have 3, and it's like kind of stable-ish, but like there's certain ways in which you could push it where it's not so stable. Same thing with a trike, I guess you could say, like a instead of a bike, like a trike. It has certain directions that it's really unstable, but it's also stable enough to go in a certain direction and still be stable, but it's not really completely stable. Whereas you get 4 legs on a table or 4 wheels on a car, and all of a sudden it's like you basically hit maximum stability. If you add more wheels to a car than 4, you're not actually increasing the stability, but you add 4, or you add a 4th wheel to a trike and turn from a trike to a car, essentially, and you do increase stability. So you've hit the maximum amount of stability for stable, for the perception of stability almost. But it's about perceiving completeness in a weird way. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it, but this is where the Markov blanket comes from. But also in the context purely of like Karl Friston's work, you could say that it just is almost, definitionally existing. But what's interesting is that when you look at this is how he's organizing the these different aspects of this of his model: value, surprise, entropy, model evidence. These are also, these 4, he's saying that's, it's a Markov blanket. It's coming from this though. And you can look at that by saying, okay, value. Here, let's do this. Value. I'm going to try and put them where I think they should be. Surprise. Value would be actually, let's see, surprise would be separate. And then value would, I guess, be oneness. Entropy would be, and then model evidence. Entropy is here. And model evidence, or self-evidence, is like here, because that's what model evidence is. That's what he means by that. He goes on to discuss it. And it's like, you're looking for evidence of the self. You're looking for something that confirms your internal worldview or your internal understanding, which is the self. It's through the self. It's based on yourself. Surprise is when something is like separate from you, or you could even say surprise maybe is outside, but I would, it's one of these two. Either entropy could be separate, surprise could be outside. Not sure, but probably this. Value, oneness. And what's interesting is that my theory is primarily about or indicates that the goal of our will, or our will, I guess you could say, the goal that we will, I guess, is, as a sentient being, you have will, which is really the desire to do that which is not being done. But it's really like desire. It's that part that's really defining of will. It's desire. It's like it's got this, will is really, it's defined as that which is beyond you. But it's also defined as like, it's defined by your desire, your internal desire. You have to have that internal desire to have will. If you have no desire, then you have no will. So then you have, but the thing is, if you have no will, then you have no you. This is the remote for the lights. This has no will. It's at all. It doesn't want to do anything. These magnets, do they want to do something? It appears that they do, but maybe it's that the the molecules in it are what want to do something, or the atoms in those molecules want to do something. But it looks like the individual magnets want to do something, but they probably do not. But there is someone there that wants to do something. That's why it's doing something. That is not. That is almost like swimming upstream. That's what it's like, why are these holding on to each other? When gravity is pushing them down, it's like they should fall, but they don't, because there's someone here that has will. It's not the magnets, but it's probably who make up the structure that we are calling a magnet. And there's someone with will there. And but there is no desire of even the magnet. And but in that case, it does have like this it does have this perception, I guess, or this, it does kind of look like it, but it's not true. It's not the case. And so will is I defined it originally as like the desire to do that which is not being done. And I would say that's like will, but the will can also, it's also tough, because will is sometimes the desire to keep doing that which you're doing, but also is, the context that you are within, that you're operating within, is against you, if that makes sense. So if you're like, I want to keep doing this, but everything else in life and in the world is basically trying to stop you, or is you have to fight against it, essentially, then you're still like, it's the desire to do that which is not being done by the system naturally. And if in just like I don't even want to say the system naturally, because the system is a sentient system, but to us, we just view it as a constraint. The objective constraint is like entropy is the objective constraint, but it's really that the universe, God, is moving things around according to their will, and we have to go along with it or not. And but you will be, moved, essentially. So things have to change, and it's basically, entropy is really change that happens almost like against the will of us, but it's due to the will of God, in some way. Or, I mean, yeah, it's kind of tough to explain, but I mean, because it's not even tough to explain, it's tough to explain it all. I wrote this the other day, and I wrote this down. And I was like gonna share it here, and it's still, it's not perfect, but I hope it conveys it. But it's kind of relevant to this. It's like, it's impossible to describe or display the holisticness of God in any one construct within creation. So it's like you have to talk a lot and about things from multiple different perspectives. In fact, I would say you probably have to talk about things from 4 different perspectives in order to actually have like a stably complete, mostly complete view. Not even saying you can't even have more, but to get a foundational understanding that's complete about something, there's probably 4 different dimensions to it that you have to understand or describe. So, but it's not a coincidence that we're going to just keep seeing this 4-fold pattern. Sounds kind of like hyperbolic space. Let's look that up here. Hyperbolic space. Hyperbolic space, developed independently by people whose names I can't pronounce, is a geometrical space analogous to Euclidean space, but such that Euclid's parallel postulate is no longer assumed to hold. Well, I can say this, that that's probably pretty similar to what I'm talking about, is like it's a structure of relation, it's a relationship structure, which is really means like a geometric structure, but it's like a metageometric structure because there's those relationships, even though we can try and describe them with, saying the the angle of this in relationship with this, but really like it's a little different than our understanding of like geometry when we're looking at a triangle, but it is about relationships. But it's about connections that form a structure, a larger structure. This is beautiful. I mean, that is just amazing. I think that probably like what is this hyperbolic space is like essentially kind of like this, like my cosmological verse. It's like it's a structure in which there are connections. So, you can look individually, like, and it's all connected. It's entirely connected. If I delete just one thing, everything turns to 0. But if I input just one thing, everything, is impacted by that. Okay. So it's entirely connected, but there's multiple things going on here because this cell is connected to these two cells because it's a summation. But also it's next to, it's in a lane, it's in one line, the same line as this cell, but it is, it's below this cell and it's next to this cell, and obviously this is tough because we're looking at a 2-dimensional model of a 4-dimensional space. Okay, or we're looking at a 2-dimensional model of a 4D structure. I don't even want to say space, a 4D structure. And that is not ever going to be completely accurate. It's going to have some representativeness to it that is, same. That's what this is. As well. It's just a manifold. Interesting, but okay. Let's see. Everything I learn in order to accept it's true, but it would be hard to live if we saw everything. But would it not be nice to be able to see photons and fields so we have an idea of how physically big they are, what they look like, etc. That's how my brain works anyway. I have to visualize everything. I'm very similar. I visualize everything, but you do perceive photons. Actually, a photon doesn't exist outside of your perception. It is, or outside of the perception or the action of God or the perception or action of us. Like protons do, probably neutrons do, but electrons are probably points of focus on a wave that come from us. When we look at something, we see a point of focus. A quark is probably a force point, is what I call it, which is interesting because we call it. It's a fermion. It's a matter particle, and then you have, but I would call the quarks force points. They're like points of force. It's like the fingertips of God, like pushing things. Almost. Not even almost. It's like probably super literally. That's what it is. And then it's like that initial push and orientation. You need it's like, why do you need, try and manipulate this into any kind of, just with your 2 fingers, okay? Like you're limited in how you can do it. And yeah, we're in 3D, in the perception of 3D space, so you're still kind of like, this is a cheat, but just bear with me. But now you add a 3rd finger in, And one of those fingers is different than the other two. Two of them are fingers and one of them is a thumb. Now imagine trying to manipulate the world with 3 fingers, but they're all fingers and there is no thumb. It's really hard. You have to cheat basically, which is you're taking advantage of the perception of 3D space. So you're having the 3 dimensions to it. But if you eliminate that kind of, and you've just got the 3 dimensions that are your fingers or that are your points of contact, if you only have 2 and they're different, they're opposites. You've got, 2 different kind of axes that you can move along. But if you have 3 fingers and they're all fingers, you still can't really move along through. You can't manipulate the world in the same way. But if you add the thumb to 2 fingers, now all of a sudden you've got this like ability to really manipulate things. Like if I took your thumb away, you are losing a huge amount of ability the ability to manipulate your world with in your hand. And if I took away all of these 3 fingers but left you just a finger and a thumb, you still have lost a lot. But if I took these 2 fingers away and left you these 3, how much would you really lose? Very little, actually. And this is because there's this structure, this common structure that has to do with differentiation and weightedness, essentially. So differentiation requires not just a differentiation of 2 different things. Fundamental differentiation, which is really in the context of choice or goals from a first-person viewpoint, I guess, and from a third-person viewpoint, it's kind of like, I don't even know if that's the right way to put it, but is about I'm different from you, you're different from me, etc. But this structure requires a value hierarchy. So it's like that path, there's 2 paths, and one of them has to be more valuable than the other for you to actually make a choice. If you don't perceive one path as more valuable than the other, then there is no ability to make a choice. You just can't. You literally cannot make a choice. If you see 2 paths if you're traveling down a road and you come to a fork in the road and neither one gives you any indication that it's going to be better at getting you to where you need to go, or where you want to go, you cannot make a choice. If you don't have a goal, you also can't make a choice. Because how do you determine the value of a choice if you don't have a goal? You can't. So and if you don't perceive the different, the different the paths as different, truly, like as going to different places, which really means they're different choices, then you can't make that choice either. You need both. You need a goal, and you need the ability to like perceive difference in value, and you need the ability to perceive difference in structure. So like you need the ability to see the fork in the road. You need the ability to see where each of those 2 paths lead, and you need a goal in order to make a choice. And there's probably something else there that's a fourth, but it's like different. It's like the whole. It's like why gravity is different than electromagnetism, the strong force and the weak force. Those have all been unified, but they can't unify them with gravity, because it's like it's the more fundamental one. It's like the one we're in. It's like the whole, whereas the others are contextual in a way. But it's like inside, outside, and separate. It's like the inside would be the strong nuclear force. Outside would be electromagnetism, and the weak force would be separateness, and then oneness is gravity. So it's like all of them combined. It's like when people are like, should we gravitize the quantum or quantize gravity? And I think when you say you gravitize the quantum, that makes sense. You don't quantize gravity. You gravitize the quantum. You don't look for the graviton. You realize you're inside the graviton. So, next clip. It's interesting, by the way, like free energy principle, it sounds like free will. And I know some people would be like, no, yeah, but you're just grasping at patterns here. But I mean, it's like, why is the free energy principle so linked to agency? And what is agency? If not the ability to make choices and have an internal a perception of a perception at all. Like there is no. It's funny. Curt Jaimungal, whose YouTube channel hosted this, and who's having this talk with Karl Friston, and which, like I said, the whole talk is linked below, which I highly recommend watching it. It's not very long. The Rethinking the Foundation series is really good. All of them. We've talked about other ones on here, but he asked on Twitter today, I think, or yesterday, something like, is awareness, basically, does consciousness require awareness, or are they the same thing, or or vice versa, something like that, and it's like these concepts are simultaneously existing. Same thing with intelligence. There is intelligence and there is sentience, or I guess you could say there is intelligence, there is perception, there is awareness, which is really self-awareness. There's no such thing as awareness without self-awareness. And then there's perception, which some people call consciousness, which some people call self-awareness, consciousness. Consciousness is just a term that is used a bunch of different ways. But there are 4 different kind of more specific things that I think you can roll up all into sentience, which is like, intelligence and self-awareness and I guess you would say agency, something like that. All of these things are like all simultaneously existing in this as different aspects of the same structure. So intelligence is just it's an aspect of a sentient being. Agency is an aspect of a sentient being. Self-awareness is an aspect of a sentient being. Perception of beyond the self is an aspect of a sentient being. So these are like 4 different attributes or conceptualizations of attributes of a sentient being. And they are all simultaneous. You cannot be intelligent without also being self-aware. You cannot be you cannot have self-awareness without having agency, essentially. You cannot have agency without, I don't know, what was the last one, I guess without I guess externality almost, but maybe that's not the correct way of putting it. But without perception, you can't have agency without perception. I'll say that. And it's funny because I've been engaging in these like talks on Twitter a little bit, just a couple, in these live spaces that are about AI, which just sometimes I'm like, don't want to do that, but I don't know. Like, I don't know. I just sometimes, it's like I get afraid that somebody will take what I say and you'll have a Jurassic Park situation where like they're smart enough to realize how to do something, but like not wise enough to know that they shouldn't try, essentially. And I get worried about that sometimes. But then I also have to remember the number one repeated phrase in the Bible is "do not fear," and also I have to remember that it's logically inevitable, even within the context of my own theory, that God's will be done. And like, you're just supposed to be honest and kind and tell the truth as much as you can. But while being honest, and you're meant to be honest and kind. These are like, it's like two things that you have to be simultaneously. There's probably two more, because it's probably four: honesty, kindness, and probably curious and cautious, maybe. Honesty. You have to be honest, kind, curious, and cautious. That's pretty good. There's something to that. Yeah, that's actually really good. I'm gonna think more about that. But there's but that's our like, we all have simultaneously all of those like responsibilities. You have a responsibility to be kind. You have a responsibility to be honest. You have a responsibility to be cautious, and you also have a responsibility to be curious. I think you genuinely do. I don't think that those are just like attributes of people. They are all aspects, potentialities, or degrees of freedom of sentient being, and it is a because they are all simultaneously existing, they are also probably all simultaneously our responsibility. But you have to say them individually almost to like understand them. It's like you have to be honest and kind. We don't have a word for being kind and honest at the same time, because we need two different terms to describe how you should be, because it's like a coin has heads and tails. You can't have a coin without heads and tails, but like you can't look at heads and tails at the same time. You can only look at one side of the coin at once, because of the constraints of focus of your own mind, which is the constraints of perception of your own mind, which is the four primary perspectives. So you're going to see four. You have to be kind, you have to be honest, you have to be curious, and you have to be cautious. And you can be actually all of these things at once if you are a being, because we're talking about a dynamic structure that is multifaceted, that is this, four-faceted, or that is fourfold, but it is always fourfold. So, Ben, you can be all of those things at once. It's just tough. And people, I saw a YouTube channel today that was like the brutal honest truth. And I was like, the most true thing is always kind, actually. Like if you're like, this is just, the truth hurts. It's like, no. That's true sometimes, but like it's not a defining attribute of truth. And sometimes kindness can hurt, but it's not the person who's hurting you. It's you who's hurting. It's like different a little bit. You can say things in a kind way and be honest. But the other thing that I was going to get at, though, is that like people on these four attributes of a sentient being, like intelligence and self-awareness and perception, perception would be outside, self-awareness would be inside, intelligence, maybe, I don't know, separateness or I don't know, separateness. I got confused on which ones I already said. And then there's what was the other one? It was intelligence, self-awareness, perception, and there was one more, but these are these 4 attributes of a sentient being. People in these AI groups, they are all like, they don't understand this, and but they're really good at these language models and things like that, and they know the lingo that I don't, and they studied the different projects of the different companies that I didn't, and I don't have to. You know, I derived the same basic structure as a neural net, essentially, which is like it's just a structure of information differentiation. And it was like one of the first models I made. It was just very simple, but you can just extrapolate it out, and you'll get like ChatGPT. But which is this, you know, decision tree structure right here. And like, it's this triadic but binary tree structure that you can see as also the neural net structure for all these different neural nets. If you look up neural net, neural net, look, oh, boom, right there. It's this triadic, like, you know, ish structure. Same thing. But the point is, though, is that I've asked these people, it's like, are you saying that this model that you're showing right now is sentient? And they're like, no, conscious, maybe sentient, but yeah, definitely conscious. I'm like, even if those aren't the same thing, whatever you're trying to say is probably still wrong, because you can't even say they're intelligent but not conscious, or intelligent but not sentient. That's not actually true. And ChatGPT doesn't do anything. It doesn't interpret any information without sentient beings as part of the system, as the ones who made the system and input the inputs into the system and judge the outputs of the system. You know, who made ChatGPT 4? It's like, why ChatGPT 4? And because we had to update it, you know? It's like, there's no intelligence there. It's just I call it just a dynamic algorithm, or an interaction algorithm. It's not even an interactive algorithm. It's an interaction algorithm. It's us interacting with each other, and there's this through this structure, and we're impacting the structure, but it's not a being. So it's not interacting with us. It's interactive in a way. But regardless, they don't get this. They think that this is just a tier level, and like the top is like sentience. So they'll say human level, or non-human level, or like superhuman level, you know, AI. And it's like, these are just not real distinctions, actually. That's even worse, actually, than saying something, you know, intelligent but not sentient. I mean, they're both wrong, but the other one is like in relativity still. What is human level AI? What does that even mean? Versus like superhuman level, you don't know. But I would just say sentience is sentience, and yes, there is a different constraints and degrees of freedom that are specific depending on which level you are in this periodicity of sentience. But there's also, you know, commonality of nature, which is sentience. Sentience is sentience, and it has will, and which is a goal. But whereas like Karl Friston would say here, you know, you can be surprised. It's like, that means you have an internal model, like you have an expectation. And if you have an expectation, then you can be surprised. But if you can't have an expectation, then you can't be surprised either. But if you do have an expectation, then you can be surprised. You have to have a value to have an expectation. And we perceive entropy, but that's not actually really as fundamental as it seems. it is something we have to contend with. It's because of the hierarchy, the nested hierarchy are within, which means like if you don't move along with the flow, eventually like you will be like destroyed by it because it's more powerful than you. That flow is change, is all flow is change, and so the like fundamental flow is perceived as entropy in some ways, but it's not really. You can go with the flow and escape entropy still, but that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. If you're trying to live forever, you're trying to swim upstream. But if you're like, I'm going to escape entropy and not or transcend entropy by reproducing and having kids, like then you're actually going with the flow. You're not, but you're also you're escaping entropy, which is really like kind of a perception that comes from you and your limited view of the whole, and you're fighting it. But I don't think like the escaping of entropy is actually anybody's fundamental goal. I think that it is just kind of a perception that arises in certain circumstances, but in a relativistic circumstance, in a specific circumstance inside a greater sentient structure. But the thing is that what really I think is more fundamentally what we're trying to do, what every sentient being is trying to do, is trying to maximize its meaning, which is different than trying to minimize entropy. Minimizing entropy for what? For what purpose? Like fundamentally, to exist more. Like if you want to exist as much as you can, then you want to maximize the impact that you have. That's really what we all want. We are also trying to minimize entropy sometimes, but like that is not you're not going to win. It's like these people who are trying to stop their aging. It's like that's not going to help, or you're not going to win. You're just not. I saw a YouTube thumbnail the other day, and or somebody shared something on Twitter, and it was like some expert, who spent all their time studying aging, and they're like, we can absolutely escape aging. I'm like, well, what if you're sentient still when you die? Like, is that escaping aging? You're not going to escape aging in this world ever. You will hit a limit. Trust me. That's one thing I don't think any of us will ever do. And that is a perspective that you have when you don't realize the context that you're contending with, which is not entropy for entropy's sake. It's entropy due to larger action of a being that you're within, that is a fundamental nested hierarchy of willful beings, and you cannot override the will of the being that you are within. You just cannot. So good luck, though. Maybe some things are better left unseen. Everything I learn in order to accept it's true. Sorry, I'm just into existential horror theme. No worry, you don't have to apologize. It's good questions. We have a sports saying in New England: "Do your job." Do your job. That's what I'm saying. Do your job, and your job is like a lot of things. You have a lot of jobs, and they are all just as important. Like there are some jobs that are like fundamental, universally super personal jobs, and those things are they are really important, like being kind, being curious, being cautious, and being honest. Reduce entropy and increase synergy. Yes, increase synergy. That's such a good way of putting it. That's what you want. But because to be truly synergistic, though, is is to maximize meaning, because that's also the goal of the being that is you're within and subject to. So to me, if you want to be synergistic with that being, then you also want to maximize meaning. But and that takes place within the context of a generative, animated structure composed of sentient beings. And so you have to take that into account as the context of like what that means and maximizing meaning. It doesn't purely mean just making, everybody do what you want. It means like getting them to change in a way that is also, if they need to, in order to be more generative, but also change in a different, if you impacted people in a way that made them less generative, then you actually are not maximizing meaning, because even if you impacted everybody in the world, but you made everybody less generative, it's like there's a limit to your impact. It's like if you're a cult leader and your goal is to inspire people to be hedonistic and selfish and not, get into permanent partnerships with members of the opposite sex, and get married and have kids, but like everyone in the world is impacted by you, and let's say most people end up adopting your ideology, you are not as impactful or meaningful as the person who inspired people to permanently commit to others and form families, because permanent commitment is like you're impacting somebody for their entire life. It's much more impactful. It's not a circumstantial impact. It's a total impact. That's a huge difference. And then it's not even just a huge difference. Huge is the wrong term to use, because it's like it's a fundamental difference. And then if you inspire people to be generative, and which is to form families and have kids and things like that, it's like those kids go on to have kids, and those kids go on to have kids and form families, and also they all go on to enter into permanent partnerships and impact other people for the entirety of their lives. It's like this is way more impactful, and it will be, than just like everyone who's alive right now, or not say everyone, most people who are alive right now adopt your viewpoint. If your viewpoint is not generative, then you are not going to maximize your meaning. So you want to increase synergy, but to do that means to maximize meaning in the context of fundamental existence, which is sentient, replicative, nested hierarchy. But this next clip,
the likelihood of these data given me as a model of the world, the external states that caused these data, and that has been described or summarized in philosophy as self-evidencing. So I'm minimizing my self-information just is acting and perceiving in a way where perceiving is associated with my internal dynamics in a way that maximizes the evidence for my model of the world or the external states. Put that another way, this self-evidencing just means that it looks as if I'm going around gathering evidence for my model of the world that just is me. So I'm just gathering evidence for the fact that I exist. So that's the most deflationary but poetic reading of this Bayesian mechanics. So that gives you just a flavor of the different ways in which you can understand ways of describing the dynamics of things, where the thing in virtue of its existence cannot have any other dynamics, and that can be sort of neatly summarized in terms of the existence of a particle implies a partition of the system's states, the systemic states, into internal blanket comprising sensory and active, and external states that are hidden behind the Markov blanket from the point of view of the internal states. And because the active states change but are not changed by the external states, they look as if they're going to reduce the entropy of the blanket states. And this means that action will appear to maintain the structural and functional integrity of the Markov blanket. And one can read this in terms of self-assembly in computational chemistry or in biology as self-creation or autopoiesis of a very elemental form. And finally, internal states appear to infer the hidden causes of sensory states by increasing Bayesian evidence or model evidence or marginal likelihood, and actively influence those causes. And in my world, we refer to this as active influence, taking this self-evidencing perspective afforded by the interpretation of the underlying self-information as effectively the log of the negative log of Bayesian model evidence. So that was the first half of the talk. I now notice that we're being
Who was the first to point this out? See these three different colors that you have here, the three different
Right.
derivations. Who was the first to point out that they're all
the same.
reflections under different assumptions? Four, actually, that they're all under the Langevin equation, which is then decomposed in various ways.
My trading, sorry, yes, just to qualify, this is the Bayesian mechanics that is exactly the same as these things, but you've just now split your x's into internal and active states. So I've shown the fourth one because the Bayesian mechanics is just the same as that. I don't know. The last time I was sitting in a lecture theatre doing physics was at the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, some 40 years ago.
So you've at least independently stated this.
Oh, well, yeah, but I'm assuming it's common knowledge. Certainly,
Okay.
I mean, you'll know better than I will. Certainly, the equivalence between the pathological formulation and the Fokker-Planck equation, and the time-independent Schrödinger equation. Well, I don't say common knowledge.
Okay, I realized I didn't have my mic on for like 2 seconds, but all I said was, okay, next clip. This is good. But this is when he says that, these are reflections of each other. That's very sensing and acting is about it, and inside and outside, these internal and external, these are very obviously reflections. And it's not even just that these two things are like reflections. It's like let's look and make sensing and acting one thing. Let's call it one thing. So what would we call it? We call sensing and acting. I guess you could say it's like it's like your perspective almost. Or no, I don't know how to do this. But external and internal are very obviously, just two perspectives of one structure that we're trying to say. But here's the thing. This is why it's so tough, and why you have to say two things. It's like, we call something addition. We say addition and subtraction. Okay, and then we have multiplication and division. These are also, in a fundamental context, these are two different perspectives of the same thing always. So how does a cell multiply? By dividing. How do you add cake from one plate to another if there's cake only on one plate and you can only take from that plate? You subtract cake from the one plate that has cake and you add it to the cake to the plate that doesn't have cake. These are two perspectives of one action. Is there a term for that? Addition and subtraction. I'm sure there is. Are the arithmetic operations. Okay. But what about multiplication and division? Addition versus multiplication and division. What's the terms? The order of operations can be remembered by the acronym PEMDAS, which stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, addition and subtraction. There are no parentheses or exponents, so start with multiplication and division from left to right. Okay. And really, if you think about what multiplication and what exponentiation as an action, and parentheses as an action, which is really containing. So containing is as an action, which is like oneness. But on the flip side of oneness is separateness. For something to be one with one thing, it has to be separate from other things around it. So like, and this has to do with perception by a sentient being and also the structure of a sentient being. For me to be me and one person, I have to be separate from you. And for this, but on the perception front, for this water bottle to be one water bottle, it has to be separate from other water bottles, and or separate from the walls of my house and everything. It's just separate. But it's these reflections. But then there's this. I don't know if we have words for this. What? Addition and subtraction. What is the word for that? I don't think we can have one. The other one, and then a multiplication and division. I don't think we could have one. Because even though they are the same thing, they're just two different perspectives of the same thing. How does a cell multiply? By dividing. But this, when you're talking about a fundamental structure, like which is a sentient structure, that's how that, they are the same. When in the fundamental context, they are the same action viewed from two different perspectives. And really, it's like generation is like the term that we could use to describe all of PEMDAS. It's like the order of operations in mathematics is like PEMDAS, which is like generation on fundamental level. And what it is like exponentiation is to grow. And to use parentheses, which is to contain, is to like, or it's like to make everything one. So all of a sudden you put parentheses around it, you contain it all, and now it's all one thing. And then you have exponentiation, which is like you take something and then but really it's like multiple things. You're like you're increasing multiplicity, I guess. You're separating almost. But it's tough to come up with terms for these, especially a term that describes both sides of the coin. But we do have a term called a coin that is the term coin, and that implies it's heads and tails. Every coin is heads and tails. But so what is the term for addition and subtraction? If you know, say it in the chat, please. I do not know, and I cannot find it. The function of multiplication is to represent what are multiplication? What are multiplication and division called? The arithmetic operations. Arithmetic operations is a branch of mathematics. It involves the study of numbers, operation of numbers that are useful in all other branches of mathematics. So it comprises operations such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. No, but what is just addition and subtraction? The four basic operations in math. Sounds like the four primary perspectives. The four fundamentals of math. Oh, look, even math. The four fundamentals of math. Where does that come from? Wow, I have way too many tabs on here. That. but what is there a term? Okay, this is Quora. It says, is there a word that means multiplication and division? Okay, so let's see. Yes, it is called multiplication. It suffices to simply talk about multiplication because multiplication encompasses division. Assuming the existence of multiplicative inverses, this is the approach typically taken in higher mathematics. Exactly what I said. Division is not fundamentally a different operation. Division is A by B is defined as multiplication of A by the multiplicative inverse of B. The same goes for addition and subtraction. By the way, subtraction is a form of B. Is defined as addition of B and the additive inverse of A. You might think of it as cheating because the multiplicative inverse of B is 1 over B, and that involves division of 1 by B, but division is not actually needed. One can define the multiplicative inverse of B as the number that, when multiplied by B, results in 1. Similarly, the additive inverse of A is the number that, when added to A, results in 0. Okay. So, there we go. That's cool. I failed math class in high school multiple times because I never did my homework. And it was literally just because I never did my homework. I didn't do a single algebra homework assignment all of high school. I just crammed for the tests, and I then prayed for the teacher's mercy, and that was it. And but it wasn't because I was bad at math. I did my homework in college, and I was like the top of my math class. But it was also the first time I did my math homework ever. The reason why it's so important, and I also like struggled with Spanish and in college and stuff too, because I never did my Spanish homework, but even in college. But the thing is that's the same thing. Language and math are the same subject when we're talking about like practical mathematics or algebra and things like that. We're not talking about fundamental, numerology almost, but like not numerology in the way that like most people think of, but like numerology meaning like the context of numbers is a better way is like what true numerology would be. It's not like magic or something, or woo, I don't know, whatever term you're going to use to mean like nonsense. But it's about the like true numerology would be about the study of the context of numbers. And that's fundamental to mathematics, which is the communication of quantities, which is just a language. And so the thing about a language is you need to be in the language, which means like you need to do your homework every day, or you need to speak to somebody every day in Spanish, or do your math homework every day. You need to be in it because it is a language. And that's what I had such a problem with, is I would see, I remember in like side tangent, but like in the first time I ever like really started to struggle with math was that I noticed was in 7th grade, where we were learning inequalities, and they put the greater than and equal sign, and I remember just like I literally just like tried writing something for the first question. I just put the pencil down and just sat there, and the teacher just kicked me out because I just didn't do any of the homework. And I just remember looking at these symbols and just being like, I don't even know what these are. And because I just zoned out in class and just like wrote and stuff like that. But yeah. And then I learned them and I was like, wow, that's actually amazing. Like that really looks like it's like greater than and equal to, and like the concepts were just like, I was amazed that there was symbols for these concepts. And then I did fine. But like, you got to be, it's a language. That is what it is. But it's interesting that even in the academic context, they do know this basically, that, they're fundamentally the same action, which obviously they are. If you think about like how they are, an equation, and how you do an even an equation, like, is about like making things equal, which is about like the recognition of the symmetry between two different sides of an action that's taking place, which is really this like equation. It's interesting. This whole project has got me to think about math like way differently. It's gotten me to actually think about math. So, but yeah. Next clip. Teleology.
That we have left, I want to talk about maximization or minimization. You said that, let's take Darwin as an example. Survival of the fittest sounds like if you're the fittest, you will survive.
Yep.
But then you said, well, if you were to survive, it would appear as if you were the fittest, and those two aren't the same statements. And rather what's happening is the latter.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
help me understand how those two sentences are different.
I think they're only different in the sense that the notion that I survive because I have a high adaptive fitness implies a teleology. So you can have a completely teleologically or teleonomy or teleology free account of self-organization under the free energy principle, and also quantum mechanics and stochastic and classical mechanics.
Okay, so you weren't saying that. Let's say we take this cup, and if I was to let go, it would just fall, and it would fall because it's minimizing action. Now, for people who are listening who don't understand what action is, let's say it's minimizing energy. We don't need to concern ourselves with the difference between two different types of energy being action. It's minimizing something, whether it's energy or action. So that's one way of saying it, that this cup minimizes its action. But then another way, from what I understood of what you were saying, is that I will only perceive objects that minimize their action. In other words, this cup could have done plenty of other actions, or there could be many other cups, but my perceptual system, for whatever reason, is only tuned to what minimizes. And therefore, it's not that what survives is the fittest, it's only that I'll see what's maximizing the fitness as surviving. Or I'll only see this cup move in this direction because it minimized something.
I think that's absolutely correct, but I think sort of makes it
Okay,
more...
so that sounds loony to me. So explain to me how that's correct.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying, the things out there conform to a path of least action because they exist. And therefore we will perceive them as pursuing paths of least action. So that's all the free energy principle is saying. It's just saying that we pursue paths of least action. And what could one apply that to? Well, adaptive fitness, for example. So Darwinian thinking. Adaptive fitness is just the thing that supplies the potential in the action, which is time times potential. So you're maximizing the adaptive fitness, or you're minimizing the negative adaptive fitness. The nice point of contact that comes into the way you perceive the cup, though, I think reflects the fact that when you put the Markov blanket in place, so don't forget about doing that. You can't talk sensibly about perceiving apples unless you've got an observer and something that's being observed. So you've immediately invoked a Markov blanket. So if you're talking to Stephen Wolfram, he'd call this the observer problem. To solve the observer problem, to even talk about it, you've got to have a Markov blanket. So there has to be a distinction between the observer and the observee. The measurement problem, the same thing in quantum physics. Mechanics. You have to have the Markov blanket explicitly in play. So once you've got the Markov blanket in play, then the adaptive fitness is just the measure of synchrony or isomorphism between the inside and the outside. So literally, if you take this Bayesian mechanics perspective, the adaptive fitness is the ability of you to fit into your environment, by which I mean the sensory impressions provided by your environment, the feedback that the environment is giving you, was the most likely for the kind of thing that you are, the phenotype that you are. So adaptive fitness is just the marginal likelihood of the environment providing that sensory, the way that the environment influences you by the sensory states is the measure of adaptive fitness, and it's just the fit of your model, the ability of your model to fit this world. So it all, I think, it does actually come back to you say, I can only perceive falling apples because apples only fall.
Yes.
If I lived in a universe where apples which did not comply with a principle of least action, which is not impossible, I could live in a very small universe where random fluctuations cause things to depart enormously from paths of least action, and I would still be able to model that. But in this instance, I would be able to perceive random fluctuations of the apple, or itinerant dynamics which violated, say, conservative dynamics.
You couldn't. That is not possible for that universe to even exist. So you couldn't really model it, but you can like do cheats and stuff to like think about it, but it's not. If it's something can't even exist, then um then yeah, it just, I guess, I mean, I don't know if that's if he's just, there's a very, if you, when you start super fundamentally as from from the very first, from the very base that you, as base as you can get, if you start being as, from a position of being as based as you possibly can, and that term is just funny to me, but then what you end up with is you realize like there's only like one way to make a universe, essentially, that is at least it's just that there are constraints that come from the oneness of and sentience of God that are very, very specific. And because God is existence itself and is sentient, you can't be next to God. You can be within God, but you can't be next to God. And so he has to create within him anything that is all encompassing, can only be differentiated as being from beings that are within it, because there's nothing next to it to beings or things that are within it, not anything next to it. And so this is a super constraint. Like, it is so incredibly constraining that it's all constraining. And but another aspect of this is like the goal of God is also completely constraining. But here's the thing, is like, what if there's only, what if even it's so constrained that God couldn't have this goal or that goal, but God could only have a goal or no goal? And or God could only have one goal, but he could choose to pursue it or not. But he can't choose between the different goals. Maybe with about things going on within the world, but not about like the creation of the world and the structure of the world itself. Eric Weinstein included in his paper on geometric unity, at the very beginning, it's like a quote by Einstein. It says, "I just want to know whether or not God had any choice in the rules of the universe." And my work indicates the answer to that is no. He had basically no choice in the rules of the universe, but he had to choose to make it. It's this interesting juxtaposition or reflection kind of situation where you don't get a universe, which is really an interaction space between multiple beings. That's really what it is. It's the perception of the network space in which beings can interact, which is really about like the constraints and degrees of freedom that separate us and bind us, and that are being perceived, and but that he could choose not to make the universe. In fact, and he had to choose to make it because it's going against his nature of oneness, because oneness is the default of existence. Existence is by definition all that exists. And so to have additional existences, essentially, then what you have to have multiplicity of being, you have to go against your nature if you're God, because God is one. And so God had to swim upstream, but at the same time, and that takes effort. Like, you don't just swim upstream without putting in effort. Like, you have to choose to swim upstream, otherwise you're getting pushed downstream. Or if you're in God's case, like, there's no entropy because he's not subject to any other dynamic system that he's within. Like, we are subject to a dynamic system that we are within. That's what causes the perception of entropy. He's not, so he has no entropy. And but he doesn't experience him having entropy. He can witness our entropy maybe, but like, he's causing it, or we're causing it by not aligning, or by having a goal that is impossible. essentially. So there is only probably one way to make a universe, and it's like so incredibly fundamental because it's like there's only one goal that God could have, which is just, that doesn't mean that he didn't have to choose to follow it. You know, you could have a goal. You'd be like, my goal is to, you know, be a good person and make, or to, you know, I don't know, get married or get a job or something. But it's like, ultimately you have to make the choice to go for it. You know, my nose is just itching. I don't know what kind of plant is multiplying right now, but one of them. So, but this when we're talking about maximization, when he's talking about like you're trying to like kind of synergize with the system, it's important. And he's talking about a Markov blanket being the context of this all naturally, which is like same kind of thing as like the 4 primary perspectives are the context. They are what every sentient being perceives simultaneously. And also we are inside the mind of a sentient being that perceives this as well. So like we're seeing this from like 2 different angles. And that's not the only context that you need to know. That's like that's the inescapable context that is always perceived. But then there's also this other context that you can sometimes not perceive, but it's always there, which is like you're inside of a sentient being that is an agent that is animated and has a goal and is dynamic and moving. You know, it's interesting. I have this right here. People like sometimes wonder what this is, but nobody asks really about it anymore, which is interesting because probably just because it's there. But it's called the Kinetrika, and I saw it and I was like, wow, that's going to help me and explain some cool things one day. And if I ask you, do you see the square? Yes. Okay. Obviously, like the square. This is a square. It is made of squares. Okay. Do you see the squares multiple? If I ask that question, yes, you see the squares multiple. But remember, this Kinetrika is not just a static structure. It's also a dynamic structure. And so if I ask you, do you see the wave? If I go like this, do you see the wave? Yes. Okay, you see the wave. And then if I ask you this, do you see the helix in the center? Do you see this spiral? And it's like the fact that it's spiraling around itself. It's waving. These waves are moving around itself. It's causing a central spiral. Is this a spiral? Is it a wave? Is it a square, or is it squares? It's like it is a square that is also made of squares, or composed of squares, or containing of squares, and it is also a wave that is spiraling. That is waving and spiraling, or that is waving in a spiral. It's like when I work on my paper, I feel like I have to repeat myself a lot, which is kind of annoying, but it's just the way you have to do it. Is like you have to say that sentience is the fundamental nature of existence, and like singularity is its fundamental structure. It's like you are you because you are one being. You are singular. You are not just singular, doesn't just mean one. Like one is just a quantity. It's like there's how many, you know, I don't know. Fingers am I holding up? One. Okay. I have 2 up. One. But like there's also this aspect of you that is defining of you as being you, which is different from other beings, not just you're one and they're one, but like you're one and you're unique, and they're one and they're unique. And singularity, like to say like that's a singularity, it's like that means, and physicists took this term, by the way. Everybody, when I first read my when I sent my abstract to people, friends of mine, and family, and just anybody I could, I was like, and I asked them to read it, and I was like, does this make sense? Can you read this? And does it make perfect sense? And because I was like, a sentient singularity, and they were like, no, I don't, it doesn't make sense. And for the longest time, I did not know why they could not understand it. I was like, this seems so just, it's on my website. You can look at it. If we go to sentientsingularity.com and you just go to like writings, this is fairly up to date, like not perfectly up to date, but fairly up to date abstract of my paper. And it's like, you know, it describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. I would read that to somebody and be like, do you understand that? And they'd be like, no. And I was like, so confused. I was like, this is going to be hopeless. How do I explain this to just random people who aren't, and not even physicists? I wasn't even trying to explain it to physicists. I don't even think they would understand that. I think they'd have less of an understanding than even the common person. And I was like, what are you getting hung up on? And they were like, the term singularity. What do you mean a sentient singularity? And I was like, what do you think about when I say singularity? What are you thinking? And they're like, I think of like black holes and like the Big Bang. I'm like, okay, physicists have destroyed this term, and our ability to just intuit what it means. But they took it. It existed before black holes were postulated and before the Big Bang model existed. Singularity, sentience, is the phenomenon of feelings, sensations, and emotions, and basically being self-aware. Singularity is defined as something that is one distinct unit or something that is especially unique. Sentient singularity theory also denotes a singularity as a structure that has the property of kind of like continuous oneness, not necessarily infinite oneness, but like continuous oneness, such as a Mobius strip, or one being that is composed of many beings, such as a multicellular organism. Sentient singularity theory can therefore be understood to imply that everything that exists is part of a single universal sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. I added this right here to the abstract. This was not there. All of a sudden, everybody that reads this gets it. Just from adding this, just like making sure that, okay, yeah, you know what sentient means. Now I'm going to tell you what singularity means, which is, it means exactly what it means. It's not, and when people say, well, in physics, it means something very specific. It's like, okay, well, I'm talking about like something more fundamental. I'm talking about like, what does it mean? Always, initially, inevitably, intrinsically, not, oh, in the context of Stephen Hawking's model of cosmology. I'm talking about like, what does it mean? Like based on the words that compose it, even, it's singular, meaning one, but a singularity is like, it's like also unique, and it has a kind of a definition that is associated with uniqueness. And as soon as I did that, I was like, a singularity in this context is a being. So like a sentient singularity is a sentient being. Okay. And they were like, okay, yeah, now that I get it, this makes perfect sense. And I was just too close to it. I was like, because I was like, singularity, just what do you think that means? But the thing is that it's not even that I was too close to it. It's that they had been cut off from it. We don't use that term anymore to describe what what it actually means, really. Usually it's just so associated with physics and in that case, like a black hole, the center of a black hole, and like the Big Bang, the beginning of the Big Bang. And it's assumed to be this like ungraspable mathematical physical point of the unexplained, and that's not what it is at all. It's like a self-evident, super obvious, intrinsically understood concept until you put people in a classroom and tell them this is what it really means, and you don't actually even tell them what it means. To say it's the center of a black hole does not tell anybody anything. And to say it's, the point at that initiated the Big Bang, it's like that doesn't tell us anything. In fact, though, I would say it's probably true. It's that we all came from a singularity. We are also moving towards a singularity. But what is that singularity? Fundamentally, ultimately, a sentient singularity. That's what it is. So the physicists can claim it's, oh no, in physics it means something very specific. Well, you know what? Inevitably, in metaphysics, it means something very specific and also entirely contextualizing of those physics that you observe. They'll be like, it's the center of a black hole, or not, or it's, it is the initial point of, it's what all of the universe came from. It's like, okay, well, who did all the universe come from? Some one meaning singular. It's just, it's funny because I really didn't want to try and sound sciencey, but like the terms quantum and singularity are not physics terms. They are terms used by physicists that existed prior to any of the application that physicists use for the term. And we need to be able to use these terms and not be judged for them for sounding scientific. But the thing is at the same time, I feel like it does come off that a lot of people do that. They do. It sounds like they're trying to sound scientific, but what if it's just that these terms have become so associated with that which is scientific that actually, but actually they're just terms that you must use. Quantity is something that you must be able to talk about when you're talking about fundamentality. And that is where the term quantum is, involved, comes from, is associated with, is you have to be able to talk about that which is singular, and meaning one and unique. A unique one, not just a one, but like a unique one, it's not one like any other. It's like, this one is mine. A singular versus one thing. It's like, yeah. But this correlation kind of versus causation thing that they're talking about is like, as I kind of went over it this entire stream, is like, it's about like simultaneous attributes manifesting and being perceived as a part of a single thing, a single structure. That's what it is that like this, if I said this, what is this? And you didn't see what was inside of it or anything. You just saw the outline and be like, is this a square? Yes. Is this squares? Yes. Is this a wave? Yes. Is it a spiral? Is it spiraling? Is it a helical structure? Yes. A sentient being is a dynamic structure. Meaning it's a structure, and it is that is acting. So it is also an action. And it's to be human is is a structure and it is an action. To be human is a structure and an action, but it's also a it's also, you know, an experience, and it's also it's an internal experience. It's like a first person experience to be human, to I mean, I am human. I experienced being human, you know, through my life, but I also experience that someone else is human, but from an outside view. It's like they're human. I know what it's like to be human from an internal perspective. I know what it's like to be for a human to be kind of like from an external viewpoint. And I also am human as a structure, you know, this bipedal, like opposable thumb, naked ape thing. And then I'm also human as like an action of like what we do as humans, which is like we pair up and we form families and we speak language, kind of like a complex language, abstract language. We build, you know, we concretize the abstract. That's what human, and we communicate the abstract. That's what, you know, humans do that. That's it's a human. That's being a human, is like to do all these other animal things and all these, you know, chemical things and all these atomic things and physical things, but also these like this like abstraction, concretizing of the abstract, and also communicating of the abstract and conceptualizing of the abstract. These are also human things kind of stacked on top of the rest of it that differentiates us and makes it, that's what's human. And so we are, it's systems like that that are going to definitely not be able to be described in terms of just one, you know, term so easily. There is a causal but simultaneous but also directional structure / action that is created. I say this in my paper, it's all the time. It's like sentience is the fundamental nature and primary structure of existence. It's a sentient singularity or sentient being. But, you know, also at the same time, we are that, and we're perceiving things so through the view of that which is that. So this multifaceted thing. And so in my and so everything that we view, that we perceive, it's gonna fractalize according to, you know, this fourfold pattern to some degree. But it's also got a directionality to it always. So it's like you know, chicken or the egg situation. They are simultaneously existing, the chicken and the egg, but there is a directionality to it. It's not that it could just go the opposite direction. You could just go from chicken, you know, turns itself into an egg. No, an egg turns itself into a chicken. But a chicken does not turn itself into an egg. It in a direct sense, you know, it doesn't just age backwards. It ages according to one direction, and that's a constraint due to us being subject to the goals and actions of a being that we're within. But, you know, the point is that context is information. And so like you have to know the context of what you're trying to understand in order to understand it at all. And that's, you know, when Curt asked, you know, what is it that this causes this or this, I don't remember the exact terminology, but he's asking a question about basically correlation versus causation, essentially. And the first thing kind of Karl Friston says is like, the first thing we have to realize is like you have to have the context, the Markov blanket. Like we're observers, and that means we're already Markov blankets. So like we are looking at the world in terms of being subject to that context, and this is exactly correct. But that's you have to know the context. But what is that context even greater? It's like it is a sentient being. There's in my and you know, when Karl Friston talks about this, he's like, I won't thingness he talks about. So here, this clip that we kind of already showed.
And I'm going to leverage the notion of everything else by just thinking about the nature of things, a foundation of thingness. The story I'm going to tell is a characterization of what it is to be something and the behaviors that that thing must possess.
This is where I think he's wrong. Things do not have behaviors. I mean, maybe I will just say this. Maybe he's not wrong, but in my work, in my paper, I talk about how the world, you can divide the world, not fundamentally, but like perceptually, into things and beings. There is nothing on a fundamental level. There's only beings. I don't want to say there's nothing that's not sentient on a fundamental level. It's just that there are only beings on a fundamental level. It's our interactions and our relationships and our that cause us to perceive things that are not sentient. But it's not that they don't fundamentally exist. A cup does not fundamentally exist. We're perceiving some perspective of entanglement that's giving us a view of a bunch of entangled sentient beings that are entangled in some way, that when we look at it from the viewpoint that we have in our position in the universe in the fundamental sentient network, or what memes called, I guess essentially you could say, what was it he said? It was the I think it disappeared. But it was a net. Oh gosh, what was it? Come on, memes, help me out. It was
the lack of these data given me as a model of the world in external space.
Dang, what was it? Come on, I'm gonna tell you. It's this is it. It's the hyperbolic space, or Euclidean space, which is just a relationship space. It's like it's a metageometric space. I wouldn't even call it a geometric space alone. It's like a metageometric space. It's like that's what a fundamental space would be, like a metageometric four-dimensional space of relationships. That's what it would be. So it's just interesting. Okay. Going to the chat. I doubt somehow I ended up joining a physics monastery. Oh yeah. Memes of Destruction is part of the physics monastery. Subscribe to his channel, by the way. It's very good. Tyler's kind of a genius. Genius is a moment that everybody has sometimes. Some people have more genius moments, but everybody has some genius moments. I'm not a genius. I have moments of genius. One of my moments of genius was realizing that there are no that genius is a moment, and idiocy is a moment too. That was actually one of my genius moments, which is really funny. Is like that realization, it was like a genius moment. It's like we have this arbitrary definition of genius. It's like IQ over 150, 140, something, I don't know, but it's nonsense. Okay, like that number is I'm not saying it's completely, it doesn't represent anything. I'm just saying it, like to say that someone is a genius and that's the definition when you're just drawing an arbitrary line in an kind of an almost an arbitrary scale is not, that's not actually a genius move, is to label that a genius. But to say like a better way of using the term is instead of like he's a genius or he's an idiot. And I have to catch myself with this one all the time, especially calling people idiots. Like I can be like, he's an idiot, she's an idiot. But like the reality is they're not. They having a moment of idiocy, or like that is idiotic. That which is what they're saying is idiotic. What they're doing is idiotic. What they're doing is genius. What they're saying is genius. Like this is better. We used to say that's genius, not he's a genius. It's like that's genius. That's the proper use. Whereas like that's idiotic is the proper use. That he's an idiot, that's not the proper use. I'm not just saying that. It's like, this is what I mean, is like the truth is actually really kind. Because it's a being. And so it's like the truth is he's an idiot. No. The truth is that's idiotic. That's what that is. And it's just different, but it's just a more accurate way of using those terms. And I that's one of my favorite genius moments that I've ever had. And it's because it's so applicable to so many things. For some reason it keeps coming up, but it's like idol destroying, but it's also like humbling because it keeps you in check and being like, he's an idiot and I'm not an idiot. Okay, calm down. You know, they said something idiotic, did something idiotic, and so do you. That's humbling. It's also humbling to be like, I'm not a genius, even though my IQ is 200. My IQ is not 200. But I don't even think, according to like their arbitrary scale, I hit like the genius level. But like if you do and you're Chris Langan or something, then you should not to embrace the identity of a genius is going to be a bad road. It's just is. It leads to like arrogance and idol worship, and also to embrace the idea that some people are geniuses and maybe you're not. Like that's also a bad road because it leads to idol worship. It's like he's a genius, so Elon Musk is a genius, so why would you argue with him? No, Elon Musk has lots of moments of genius, but he also has, his moments of idiocy, just like the rest of us. Same thing with Chris Langan. Chris Langan isn't right about everything. He's not. Nobody is except God, because only God can see everything, and everyone really. We can't, so you can't know it all. You will inevitably have a limited perspective, but that it's idol breaking to realize that the genius is just a moment, or that it's a thing, but it's not a being. There is no being that is genius, other than you can maybe say God, capital G, genius. But yeah, it's just misuse of the term, and it causes all of these problems. Terms, you can say a term means this or it means that, but like you can't, even then you usually have a binary choice. You could say it either means this or it either means that. Like when I've said this before on the story on here before too, is like one of the best examples of this realization where I applied this differentiation structure to, I've applied it to a lot of things, seeing it in Sentient Singularity Theory and then applying it to a lot of things. It's really been amazing. We're going to talk about more of them, but one of them was when you realize that like a term can mean this or it can mean that, but it can't just mean anything you want, because it is contextual still. And there is a better term than others. So like to say a genius could mean anyone with an IQ over 150, but it also could mean a moment of profound insight, like profoundly meaningful insight, profoundly applicable insight, profoundly explanatory insight. You know, it's like this. It's like when multiple things come together, and all of a sudden you get this thing that's really applicable, or that makes sense of a lot of things at once. Like that's a moment of genius, and or something that explains a lot at once. But that's much better use of the term genius, even though you could use the term genius to mean just somebody with an IQ over 50, but it doesn't lead anywhere because it's just isolated. It's not connected to anything else. Once somebody said to me, like, do you believe in the supernatural? And I was like, what do you mean by before I answer that, like, you need to tell me what you mean by supernatural. They were like, no, you tell me what you mean by supernatural. Like, I'm asking you. And I was like, no. Like, that's not how this works. You have to tell me how you're defining supernatural, and I'll tell you whether or not I believe it. And they were like, no, like, you're playing word games. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is you that's doing this. Actually, you just don't even realize he's having a moment of idiocy. And then I had this moment of genius, and I was like, okay, here's what I will say. If by supernatural you mean that which that exists but is beyond our normal perception, then yes, I believe in that. But if by supernatural you mean that which doesn't exist, I don't believe in that which doesn't exist. And they were so pissed. But they shouldn't have been. They should have seen the genius in that statement, because it's true. And they just were mad because they didn't have actually the goal of getting an answer from me. They were trying to, they had the goal of me looking like an idiot. That was their goal. Looking idiotic. See, I did it. They had a goal of making me look idiotic. Like, oh, he believes in nonsense. But a lot of people, when they say the supernatural, they mean fake. But sometimes when you use the term supernatural, you mean real, but beyond our normal perception. But the thing is that using it as a term to mean fake is dead end term. It's like using genius to mean, anyone with an IQ over 50. It's like this arbitrary thing. But it's isolated, and it's not meaningful because it doesn't generate more connections and add value. It's got this hard stopping point which you can't go beyond. But in its applicability and explainability, but to say no, by supernatural I mean that which does exist but is beyond our normal perception. Now we can actually talk about why that would be, what that is. You can't, if it just means nonsense or fake, then there's nothing to talk about. You can't go anywhere. It's the end. So we do have a choice. Like, this is what I mean by, like, God could choose to do nothing, or he could choose to do, and to do the only thing that can be done, essentially. But that there is a choice, still there. It's determinism and choice are dependent. They're not even concepts that are, not mutually exclusive. It's like they are dependent. They are causative, almost. I don't even know. They're just dependent. But I don't know. Super random tangent. But let me see if there's any final clips, and then final questions in the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. A free energy principle is a tautology. I don't even know if I answered exactly like what Curt was asking in the clip that I showed just now, but I know I started to, and I might have just gone way off track. I can't remember, but hopefully it's still helpful a bit. But some things are just dependent. But next clip.
Free energy principle is true by definition of tautology. Then why is there so many papers published on it? There has to be something more to the free energy principle than just being a tautology. So in other words, Kant has analytic truths, but there must be something here that's synthetic. Otherwise, I don't understand how it can be rich if it's not purely analytic.
Well, I never said it was rich.
I know you're not saying it's rich. The fact that we've even spent over an hour on it, and that there's more than one slide, and that there are papers, and that you're the highest cited neuroscientist in the world, implies that it's rich. So help me understand that.
I can. There is an answer, but given I've only now got 3 minutes left, I think that's an excellent place we should start. I'll give you a clue. You can use the free energy principle in the same sense you can use Hamilton's principle of least action to design automobiles, trajectories, physical artifacts that do stuff. You can leverage the free energy principle to write down your pull back a tractor. You can write down the states to which a system should self-organize, and then just solve the free energy flows or the basic mechanics to reproduce self-organization. And in principle, intelligent kind of self-organization. So you can create and simulate self-organization because you know the principles that underwrite the dynamics. So that's a clue, but I can unpack that in more detail
Okay.
the next time.
Okay, I'm gonna try for this, but what I think is what he's getting at is essentially, and I'm not saying it's all he's getting at, but like part of this is that, and this is also what why Kurt's asking this question, is even like recognizing this enough, these attributes of this uniqueness of like the free energy principle in order to be motivated to ask this question is means you're seeing what it is, which is like, it's this super simple, it's like, it's the ever-present structure. So like, if it's just this one thing that's like this very simple but repeating, structure / process, which is beingness, then it's really structure / process / nature / experience. So it's that fourfoldness. It's an experience, a nature. I'm going to write this down because this is good. Experience, nature, structure, and process. Like this, but it's one that's like applicable everywhere, and it is contextualizing, and can be of everything, and can be applied to every subject. So you can take, I don't know, the word supernatural, and you can apply this differentiation component of this fundamental pattern, animated pattern, self-aware animated pattern, to how to use this in a sentence most accurately. And you can be like, okay, it's going to have we can choose for it to mean two different things, and that's it. It can't mean anything. It can mean either this, or it can mean that. One of them is going to be more valuable than the other two, because there's this value differentiation too, not just like it's not just a structural differentiation. Okay, so one of them, and then you can perceive that when you say, okay, it can mean that which doesn't exist, or it can mean that which does exist but is beyond our perception. Okay, that one has value, obviously, because we can talk more about it. Same thing with genius. It's like, it could mean anybody with an IQ over 150. I mean, you could change it and be like anybody with an IQ over 140, but it's still the same. It really has the same meaning. It's this arbitrary, detached, kind of like subjective meaning. But then it could also mean a moment of like simultaneously meaning, or like multiplicative insight. Essentially. So, or a moment of exponential insight. It's like that, or a statement that is exponentially explanatory, or an action that is, you know, exponentially impactful. Like these are moments and actions of, and these are moments of genius. But that's, it could be one of those two things. It's like you can apply that to all kinds of stuff. You can apply it to sexual orientation and all of a sudden change the entire discussion. We're going to do that. You can apply it to what are shared common responsibilities. Okay, to be honest, to be kind, to be curious, and to be cautious, given, you know, the context of everything. It's like, this is, you're applying the 4 primary perspectives. Okay, if I were to say, how do we use the 4 primary perspectives, which is like the same thing as like using the Markov blanket and things like that, to try and solve why we can't unify gravity with quantum, with the rest of the 4 fundamental forces, you know, with electromagnetism, the strong force and the weak force. Well, if we look here, what we can see is that outside and inside and separate are kind of like distinct. They are concepts of distinction, whereas concept of oneness is kind of containing. It's like all containing, or it is containing. These are distinction. This is containing. Okay, so electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force, gravity. What is oneness like? It's like the foundation of all of these, essentially, in a way. Inside or outside of oneness, separate from oneness, separate and oneness. It is the foundation of these other 3. It's the context of these other 3. It's like the unification of these 3. And so that, when you think about that, it's like, if this is containing almost of these, and also the constructing of these, then you can be like, okay, maybe we don't actually quantize geometry. Maybe we should geometrize the quantum. It's like, that's the value of it, is like, okay, in one page you can do the 4 primary perspectives, but you can endlessly apply them. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is something I've struggled with in my own paper, is like, how do I write this in a way that's like rigorous, but also, you know, doesn't go on forever. Because, well, like, how much do I need to say? Like, look at the model. Like, do I need to explain it? No, they explain each other. It's like separate, inside or outside of oneness, inside, separate, and oneness. It's like the model itself is self-explaining. What are these? Oh, they're 4 primary perspectives. And so it's, the paper is really that it's just like connecting the models, but, or it could be the never-ending paper, which it kind of will probably inevitably be. It seems like it's being the never-ending paper, even though it's not very long. But it could be endlessly long, because I could apply those 4 primary perspectives everywhere, and I could explain everywhere that you know, I could put it in the paper, every instance of it, and you would never run out of instances. That's why it's so it's like there's something about the free energy principle that is, it's so cited because it's endlessly applicable practically, and yet it's also so self-evident, which is like, you know, he said, how is it, if it's just a tautology, then how can it be so vast? And tautology means the saying of the same thing twice in different words, generally considered to be a fault of style. They arrived one after the other in succession. It's like, it's just this it's like a self-contained statement, almost. Circular reasoning. An example of a tautology. The money should be adequate enough. It's like adequate and enough. Okay, so it's like self-limiting. But it's like circular, like loops back on itself. But yet, how is this thing that is like self-limiting and also the self-containing it of itself into a loop, like, how is that so vastly applicable? It's because of what it's describing, which is the universal context, which is the context of the physics of sentience. Dang, that's a good way to end that. I'm going to end that. Please hit the like button. I think that was pretty good. I hope that this was seen as meaningful and valuable, and please share it. Please hit the like button. Please watch the entire talk that Curt and Karl Friston had. It's linked below. It's very good. I would recommend, I like all the videos that I've seen on Curt's channel, but I really would recommend the Rethinking the Foundations series. It's very good. So with that, let me see if there was any final questions. I hope I don't miss them. Basically looking for patterns over different magnitudes, I think. Yeah. Different scales, but not a sliding scale, but like levels. That would not be nice. But would it not be nice to be able to see photons and fields? So we already talked about that. Wisdom and forgiveness ain't bad, in my opinion. No, definitely not bad. Ability to modify the self, concentration of the bridge between addition and multiplication, I think. Concatenation is the bridge between addition and multiplication. Interesting. I'm writing that. That's that. I gotta think more about that. I'm not gonna think about it on the stream, but I'm gonna think about it after the stream. Because that's, otherwise we'll go on forever. But yeah, that's good. The memes. Concatenation. I gotta think about exactly the context of where it would be applied, but that sounds like it's on the right track. I fell behind in 7th grade algebra. Yeah, me too. There's a techno-digital singularity that is inferior to the spiritual. That's true. But it's just not, we'll get it. That's another stream. You can look at my last stream, actually. What is Skynet? I talk about it. Gravity is the architecture of the arena. Dang, that's good. But it's also like the action of the arena. So I think of gravity like when you're a father and you're like pushing your kid on a bike and like to try and teach them how to learn how to ride a bike, but you're like pushing them along. Like that's, God is moving us. He's like, go. Like you're going to have to go. Like, and so you move or you experience the perception of entropy. But it's not a fundamentally true action, entropy. It's a limited view that we have that gives us the perception of entropy. It's really existence is really generative, and subjective existence would be like you could experience entropy, but it's an experience. It's not what is actually happening. But with that, thank you everybody, and please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, hit the bell notification if you want to join our Discord discussions, which are now going to be on Thursday nights instead of Wednesday nights, and these streams will be on Wednesday nights instead of Thursday nights, aiming for 8 p.m. Central for both of them. Please message me on Instagram, and then also there will be no stream next week, but there will be one the week after. Thank you, everybody. Peace.